Good whenever, Sunday, Monday, whenever you watch this. Hello. Happy beginning of your week or end of your week or happy just end of August. I think that's we can comfortably say end of August. Yeah. Happy end of whatever, whenever it is. Welcome to this week. I have a volleyballer on my hands, and I did not realize that that was going to be a thing. My daughter has shown zero interest in sports for the 8 and some odd years of her life, almost 9, which is crazy to say. And last night was her first volleyball game, and she crushed it. And by crushed it, I mean she served the ball over the net 5 times and got 5 points. And I was like, wow, did not see that coming. And that's pretty cool. And I was very proud. And not saying that she has to take after dad, but I was a college athlete, and so, you know, you know, but so the fact that we're volleyball, it was awesome, and it was a good time. So that was cool. So it's not actually fall 2024. It is a year later. It is fall 2025. We're going to talk about diagnosis and treatment. Yeah, we're going to talk about both because when you are either, so let's say you work as a case manager, let's say you work as a peer support specialist, let's say you work as you go on and become a therapist. um it's one thing to get the diagnosis right. Well, now you got to figure out what's the appropriate treatment for them, because you're going to be in a variety of settings, and we're going to talk about levels of care later on. But I don't, I'm in an outpatient setting right now. I have worked in an inpatient setting before. I have worked in community mental health before. I have worked in just the community before. And so all of those access points are trying to direct people to care. So the level of care is going to be kind of dependent on what your diagnosis looks like and how the patient is presenting and how you're clinically assessing them. So it's one thing to be able to identify, okay, this person has a substance use disorder, but then how do we get them connected to the right form of treatment, and even what treatment options are there out there for them? So that's what today's going to be. We're going to talk about the diagnosis, we're going to talk about diagnosing, and then we'll also talk about treatment and the important parts of treatment as we go. So again, this section, these first few lectures, you may be looking and be like, wow, I don't have a lot of assignments. No, you don't, because part of it is teaching you about diagnosis, and then it's kind of showing you and then sort of seeing, okay, or do you get it? Which I guess is all learning, because it's like show and then, but anyway. So diagnosis and treatment. So let's get going. By the way, I really appreciate all of you that took those of you that took up the mantle for the oldest person in the class. You were not who I was referring to, but I appreciate your willingness to join the old person club so willingly. Whichever one of you was born in 1986, you're not old, so don't say that, because then that would mean I'm old, because I was born in 1984, and I'm not old, even though I'll turn 41 during the course of this class. So, but I appreciate it, and it was actually kind of cool, to be honest with you. I was actually the person who I was referring to. I was just trying to give them a hard time, but it was actually pretty cool that so many people, older learners, are coming back and doing this kind of stuff. And I think that has online learning has really kind of changed that for a lot of people. So it's really cool that no matter what age, people are willing to be educated and learn about this stuff. And that's really neat. I mean, I'm an older learner too. I'm getting my MBA right now. Um, and so I know nothing about business, but I'm halfway there. So I guess in the next halfway, I'll know something about business. Anyway, let's talk about diagnosis and treatment. All right. So the diagnosis will provide the framework for providing your clinical service, whatever it is. Okay. So you need an accurate diagnosis such that you can develop a rich and full and appropriate treatment plan. Okay. And I'm going to say this later, but the treatment plan. So the diagnosis, when you go at first, tells us where we're at right now, right? This is where we're at right now. Okay. Regardless of all the other stuff going on, regardless of stuff from your past, which I mean is important, but like that's in the past, regardless of what may be coming up in the future, this is where we're at right now. Okay. And I'm going to say more about that when we actually get into what a diagnosis looks like. But the treatment plan kind of tells us, number one, where are we going? Okay. And then number two, what are the guardrails around what we're doing? That way, think of it like going to the bowling alley, right? You put the guardrails up if you're not very good to keep it from going in the gutter, or for your kids, right? You keep it from going in the gutter so that they can knock some of the pins down. That's kind of what your treatment plan is it's setting the path, but then also kind of setting the guardrails so that we stay focused on what we're doing. Okay. And the treatment plan can be kind of whatever you want it to be as you sort of gain clinical stuff. There's a bunch of books and stuff out there about how to develop a treatment plan. I encourage you to look at some of them. Those are not going to be the focus of this class, but there are tons of guides out there to talk about writing treatment plans, especially for substance use disorders. Okay. And we'll talk about what a treatment plan looks like again as we go on, but we need to be as accurate as possible so that we can really develop a full treatment plan. Now, the big key is don't get caught up in getting it 100% right the first time. I have had some of you in class in the past, and welcome back. Good to see you. And one of the things that some of you have emailed me about is like making sure, like already, and I'm not saying, I'm giving you a hard time as I say this. I'm not saying this critically at all, but like, there have been some questions that have been a little weird. Things have been a little weird, and you've emailed me, which you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But at the same time, there's also kind of this underlying anxiety of like, oh my God, I got to get this right. Which, again, understandable, because you want to get all the points, you're advocating for yourself. That's good. But when it comes to the diagnosis stuff, you don't have to get it right 100% right the first time. Okay. Sometimes it works out that way. Okay. Other times you need several sessions. And here's what I mean by that. So, substance use disorder is kind of broadly defined, right? And so when I can just say general substance use disorder, but if I'm working in more of a specialized field, like if I'm working in an addiction center, okay. So when I was at Journey Recovery Center, it was important for me to be able to like opiate use disorder versus alcohol use disorder versus methamphetamine use disorder, because those things are connected to what the doctors work on too. Now they have their own stuff, but being able to accurately identify what we're doing is very important because you're going to treat them very differently. There's a medication assisted treatment recommendation for opiate use disorder and alcohol use disorder that there isn't necessarily for methamphetamine use disorder. Okay. Now, if you are working in just a general, place, you can kind of get away with substance use disorder broadly defined. But it is okay to do the individual substance use disorders while also including another thing called polysubstance use disorder. And again, we're going to talk about all this terminology. So I'm just kind of planting it in your brain. That way we can refer back to it whenever we get there. But polysubstance use disorder is I'm just using whatever's available. I don't have a particular drug that I prefer over any of the others. It's just if it's in front of me, I'm going to use it. Okay. And that can happen too. Because you're going to treat substance or opiate use disorder very differently than you're going to treat alcohol use disorder. And you're going to treat alcohol use disorder very differently than you treat methamphetamine use disorder, right? Even the medications are going to be completely different. So that's why it's important to try to get, so a patient may come in presenting with one thing, and then a couple of sessions down the road, they're presenting with something else. And you didn't see that in the first time because I didn't reveal it to you. Okay. And again, we'll talk about this as we go on. Okay. Here's a couple of things that are a little dirty little secrets about the work that we do. Diagnosis is largely for the insurance company. Surprise. I work for NKU, but I don't work for St. Elizabeth, technically. I don't work really even for my patients. I work for their insurance companies. So I work for Medicaid because those are the ones that are paying me, right? I may have one out of all my patients. I may have one that's self-pay, right? And so technically then I would be working for them. But I don't work technically for patients because patients don't pay me, their insurance company does. And then they reimburse St. Elizabeth. You see what I'm saying? So especially if you work in the Medicaid population. Medicaid has standards to say, like, okay, if we're going to pay for this, we need to know what we're paying for. And so you have to follow a specific thing. One of the biggest ones is the diagnosis. Okay. As a clinician, I would prefer to have 2 or 3 sessions before I do a diagnosis. But unfortunately, I don't have that because from the moment one, I have to have enough clinical information to form a diagnosis such that I can put that in an electronic health record and send that off to the insurance for billing. I don't really love that, but that's what it is. Now, sometimes I get that, but other times, if you tell a patient, be here, your appointment's at 9, be here at 8:30. Patients show up at 9:05 and they have 30 minutes of paperwork to do, and you have an hour, or 20 minutes of paperwork to do, and you have an hour to get all the stuff in. So they do their paperwork, you go out there, they're not all the way completely done with it after 20 or 25 minutes. So then you have a choice. Do I spend time letting them finish it, or do I spend, see what I'm saying? So like it gets very complicated. It sounds really good so like, again, I told you there's book stuff and then there's real life stuff. This is the real life stuff. This is the stuff the book's not going to tell you, because that's the reality of being a therapist. That's the reality of working in this field. Is you can tell a patient, be here 30 minutes prior to your appointment, be here 15 minutes prior to your appointment, and they will show up 10 minutes late and expect to be seen. And that's not shaming them. That's not saying they're doing anything wrong. That's a reality of the field. I know for a fact that my schedulers will tell our patients, you need to be there early. And they don't really do that. I'll even have patients confirm their appointment and not show up. It's wild. And then the second thing is that sometimes patients will get a little too attached to their diagnosis. Now, this is mostly for mental health, which is not going to be the scope of what we're doing. So when we go, like when I show you some of the vignettes later on, you may be tempted to want to do a mental health diagnosis. I'm not going to grade you on that. It's good if you want to do it to challenge yourself. If you've got a copy of the DSM and you want to try to do a diagnosis, that's cool. I'm not going to give you bonus points. You can do it for your own funsies. But sometimes they get really attached to that diagnosis. And I'm actually dealing with that right now. Related to this first dirty little secret, that I diagnosed a patient with something that they were presenting with, and they sent me a MyChart message and said, I don't meet the clinical criteria for this, which she did, but like, nah. So they were kind of aggravated with me that I diagnosed them with something that they felt that was not appropriate. And that's fine. They're allowed to email me, but I'm not going to change my diagnosis because that's what I saw. But they get real attached. And I see that happen with like bipolar disorder a lot, or any of the personality disorders, which again, not the scope of this class. I don't see it as much with substance use disorder because, I mean, it kind of is what it is. But that's just something to keep in mind as you do this work, is that patients can get a little attached to what that stuff is. So if they meet the clinical criteria for alcohol use disorder, then they may say, so I'm an alcoholic. No, you struggle with alcohol use disorder, and that's okay. You're Carl, who struggles with alcohol use disorder. Fine, right? You don't have to label it as such. Okay. So those are 2 dirty little secrets that, again, the book's not going to tell you, but that's the reality of working in the field. The diagnosis is largely for the insurance company, and patients sometimes get a little too attached to that diagnosis. Okay. Treatment and treatment planning mostly stems from the diagnosis you start with. Okay. Remember that you are looking to treat what is presented at the time of service. So however they show up, that is what you are treating. All right. So if you do a clinical interview with them, which you will do, and they tell you that they're really struggling with alcohol use disorder now, and they give you all the criteria, and then they talk to you about a methamphetamine use disorder 15 years ago, that's not it's clinically relevant, but that's not diagnosable. Okay. So it is, and again, we're going to talk about all this stuff. but it it's what are they presenting with over the last 12 months? Okay. So from a rolling calendar year, 12 months, what are they presented with or what are they presenting with? Okay. So that methamphetamine use 15 years ago, good information to have. It's nice to put in a clinical narrative, but it's not diagnosable. You cannot diagnose them with methamphetamine use disorder. Okay. If they show up with alcohol use disorder and they talk about using opiates, Percocet, heroin, fentanyl, um, 18 months ago, that's not opiate use disorder because it was outside of the year. Okay. Um, it isn't even technically in remission because in remission means that they've stopped using within a year. After the year is up, it's not diagnosable. Okay. So that is technically how we're supposed to diagnose. It's within the year, right? And what are they presenting you with at time of service? Okay. The treatment plan is the roadmap for the destination where the patient would like to go. Okay. A treatment plan can change, but we need to have a plan for it to be changed. And that's okay. Now, what do I mean by this? When you're in I'm speaking mostly in an outpatient setting. Okay. In an outpatient setting, it's where the patient wants to go. Or if you're a case manager, it's where the patient wants to go. If you're a peer support, it's where the patient wants to go. Now, if you're working in an inpatient setting should have tracks and paths that are standardized and the patient agrees to this is what we're doing. Okay, so the patient consents to that. It isn't like I'm here to get treatment and then you spring like, okay, well, you're going to do 47 different things because that's what we say you're going to do. That's not appropriate. Because the patient has to agree and consent to that as well to choose where they want to go because they have the right to. Okay. Regardless, even if somebody is struggling, and this is going to be kind of a cruel depiction, right? And this is kind of crude as I'm saying this, and this can sound kind of judgmental, so I'm just prefacing you by that. This is not really appropriate language to use, but I'm circle of trust here. So, like, if a patient shows up like with a needle sticking out of their arm, they still, because they just use heroin or whatever, they still have a right to choose and refuse treatment. Okay, like that seems. Now you can make in there patient was under the influence of substance as they made this thing, but they still have the right and the autonomy to make decisions. So if they came in and they just used in the parking lot and in fact, this happened. Someone came in and they had drank like a pint of whiskey before they walked in for my session, and they drove inebriated, sat in the parking lot, drank, came into my session, and they were completely plastered, like slurring words, falling asleep, nodding out. And guess what? You may think, well, Jordan, you took their keys, right? No. Jordan, you held them for a 72-hour hold. Nope. I let them walk out the door. And you can probably scoff at that in horror. Say, Jordan, that's the law. It's not that I didn't think it was a good idea. She should not have been driving. But legally, you can't do anything about that, because then that could be, let's say I take their keys, that could be considered false imprisonment. That could be considered kidnapping. I'm not saying that it makes sense. I'm just saying it's what it is. So they walked right out the door and got in their car. I asked if I could call a ride. They said no. I asked if they would take an Uber. They said no. They walked out the door. I asked if they could just hang out in the lobby a little bit and sober up and get some water. And they said nope, they wanted to go home. And they did. I can't call the police. I have to let them walk out the door. I'm not saying that I'm happy that we did that, but I am saying that that's the law, for better or for worse. Okay. So, it's the patient is the engine of this ship. and you are just the skipper with the little hat kind of steering it in whatever direction. All right. So again, this is a reality of working in this field. But first things first, what exactly is an addiction? And how do we define what it is? And how do we begin to treat it? And how, and how, and how. But let's play with that just a second. I'm going to give you a substance. Okay. And I want you to tell me how you feel about this. I mean, this could be kind of serious. How do you feel about this? When used, this substance provides a lift in energy, slight euphoria in some users, speeds up the heart rate, boosts energy, increase adrenaline response. However, it creates irritability and severe headaches if somebody doesn't use this daily. And there are other withdrawal effects, including jitteriness, mood dysregulation, reduced control of motor functioning, and occasional nausea and vomiting. Overdose on this substance can result in audio-visual hallucinations, delirium, insomnia, irregular heartbeat, and severe muscle spasms. Some users state that they will use 3 to 4, either a lot once per day or 3 to 4 times per day, if not more. And quite frankly, it's starting to be used by teenagers and young children, along with using at an earlier age. This sounds serious. I don't know. How do y'all feel about that? That probably needs treatment, right? I mean, that's pretty serious, especially if somebody's on that. It's caffeine. It's caffeine. Many of you probably figured out where I was going with that. However, let's just say that you didn't. Let's just say that I told you that it was heroin, right? It's not, because heroin would create more of a sedative effect. It'd be closer to probably methamphetamines or cocaine, a stimulant. But how we view a substance or even substance use has a major impact on how we treat. That is an unconscious bias inside all of us, right? We have to really check that. Okay. So many of you have said that you're in recovery. That's fantastic. Your recovery is not somebody else's recovery. Okay. The things that worked for you may not work for them. And quite frankly, probably won't, because they were exclusive and unique to you. I'm not saying you can't give it as a recommendation. I'm not saying that you can't give a testimony and say, well, this worked for me. What do you think about this? But I am saying that to sit and believe that a patient is not in recovery or not working their recovery because they're not doing it the way that you did it can actually turn people away from treatment. Now, if you want to be a sponsor outside of your role as a peer support or a caseworker or even as a therapist, that's fine. The rules are different. In fact, there are no rules really when it comes to being a sponsor, because there's not a standardized thing of what that's supposed to be. However, the way we approach someone struggling with addiction, again, notice my phrasing, not an addict, but struggling with addiction, has a major impact on the effectiveness or the efficacy of treatment. More on that next week. Okay. Keep in mind the substances that we're going to talk about here, the substances that you learned about in your intro to substance use class, the 340, they're just chemicals affecting our brain. Think about that. Okay. Let's think about controlled substances. All right. For just a second. Now I can tell you the main ones, like Xanax, controlled substance. Suboxone, controlled substance. Fentanyl, we use fentanyl clinically, actually, controlled substance. You're familiar probably with what a controlled substance is, Adderall, those kinds of things. Those are controlled substances and trackable, right? Whenever a patient it's trackable. Let's talk about one that wasn't and then was, and that's gabapentin or Neurontin. Now, how can a drug go from being just fine to then being a controlled substance? How do we look at those substances differently over time? But also keep in mind, they're just chemicals. So if they're just chemicals, why does it change? Well, it's because of how we're using them. Okay. Neurontin is used to treat a condition called fibromyalgia. Gabapentin is used to treat fibromyalgia. And it is given. So when you hear about a chemical or a pill or whatever, don't pay attention to the milligram. The milligram's relative to the substance and how it goes through your body. So like when I say 800 milligrams of gabapentin, you be like, oh my God, that's a lot. Well, I mean, not really. Um, but a standard dose, a standard amount of gabapentin is like between 800 and 1600 milligrams. Okay. Now here's another dirty little secret. Sometimes, and many of you may have this, sometimes doctors will prescribe something what we call off label, right? It's not really supposed to be for that, but it works really well. There's a mental health medication called Wellbutrin, um, that is supposed to be to help. It's a NDRI, so it's supposed to be an antidepressant, norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor. A lot of words you don't need to know about them. And it's supposed to treat depression, mood disorders, right? However, when prescribed to those that were smokers, they noticed that Wellbutrin helped them to stop smoking. And so now when a patient is trying to quit smoking and they've tried Chantix, they've tried the patches, they've tried the gums, sometimes doctors will prescribe them Wellbutrin, and it works because it targets the parts of the brain that are responsible for smoking, right? It reduces the desirability to smoke. Okay. It's crazy. So that's off label, right? Well, gabapentin was the same way. So what happened is that there was a big crackdown on overprescribing of Xanax and Klonopin, which are benzodiazepines, which are highly addictive and easily abusable, and very popular for people who have anxiety disorders. Benzodiazepines are not necessarily supposed to be used long term. They can be, and there are some people who are, but in reality, the benzos are really supposed to be short-term acute anxiety. So like I'm about to get on an airplane. I'm about to, like, I'm feeling anxious so I feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety when I go out socially. So I have Xanax. They're not necessarily supposed to be used long-term. And if they are, it's recommended that they are in conjunction with therapy to kind of help work on some of that. Anyway, again, don't need to know all these things, but I'm just setting what I'm about to say. And so instead of prescribing those, what some doctors would do is they would prescribe gabapentin, because gabapentin is for fibromyalgia, which is a nerve disorder or a nerve issue. It feels like people have pins and needles in their extremities, and it helps to manage some of that, like flare-ups of nerves. And so what they found is that it really helped with anxiety, that patients would take it and their anxiety would just like drop. And so they really liked that. And then all of a sudden, since there's no more Xanax and there's now more gabapentin, now that stuff gets a street value, right? And now it's getting sold, and people are asking for more and more, and doctors are prescribing crazy amounts. We're talking like 3,200, 4,000 milligrams of gabapentin. Okay. I've seen it on Casper. So Casper is the record that Kentucky keeps all the controlled substances. And so, like, if you've ever received a controlled substance, your doctor has to pull a Casper on you every so often to make sure, you're not like getting a bunch of stuff you're not supposed to have. And so, gabapentin became a controlled substance because it was being overprescribed by doctors because they didn't want to prescribe Xanax, right? These are all still just substances. These are all just chemicals, right? Then the next, if something else starts to be abusable, it turns it. So I'm saying, like, it's not a morality thing. It's not a goodness thing. It's what are we as humans, human behavior doing, and how is it having an impact on our body? If we find out that all of these GLP-1s that we're doing, Ozempic, etc., like, are creating zombies, then maybe that changes things. And now we're afraid of zombie people because of all of the stuff that Ozempic is. What I'm saying is that, like, we need to get away from this idea that just because somebody's using a substance, that they're this horrible, terrible person because of the substance that they're using, right? Look at marijuana. Okay. And I'm not saying, like, I don't know that it'll actually happen, but there was I read an article where Trump was looking to reclassify marijuana, reschedule marijuana, right? It was a Schedule 1. Now I think it's a Schedule 3. And now to reschedule it lower, and then maybe we legalize it. Well, it's all well and good, but like think about 10 years ago when Colorado did it, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, it's the devil's lettuce! It's going to get to all the kids!" And that now we're just like, "Hell yeah, let's get weed out." You know what I'm saying? Like, we are actively changing. So why can we not do that with this other stuff? All right, maybe I'm preaching to the choir. I don't know. Let's move on. So what even is addiction anyway? So addiction is a chronic brain disease that has the potential for both recurrence, otherwise known as relapse, and recovery, otherwise known as remission. It's associated with uncontrolled or compulsive use of one or more substances, the most severe of which is classified as substance use disorder. So what is substance use disorder? Substance use disorder is a medical illness caused by repeated misuse of a substance or substances. This will usually develop gradually over time, and this also leads to observable changes in the brain structure and functioning. It's a continuum, and this is what it looks like. It starts with substance use, then it goes to substance misuse, which, to be honest with you, there is some evidence that this language is changing, and we're just taking out substance misuse. Because how do you misuse a substance? You either use it or you don't. So there is some language to kind of cut this out, but we're not all the way there yet. That then turns into a substance use disorder that then turns into an addiction. Okay, so that's the continuum that we're looking at. Okay, but it all centers on reward pathways in the brain, and these are things for you to know. Okay, and this pathway is the same pathway for all addictions. Okay, so the only difference is that substance use causes specific changes in the brain. Okay, process addictions, gambling, sex, eating, they don't necessarily cause changes in the brain, but they will. Sometimes they do, depending on neuroplasticity. But they do take the same. It's the same pathways. Okay, so we're going to look at three main structures and then some substructures underneath those structures. Okay, so the ventral tegmental area, which is this cat right here, okay, produces a significant amount of dopamine, like a lot. Okay, it's also surrounded by our midbrain, which is this structure right here. Okay, and in our midbrain, then these are the substructures, are the hippocampus, okay, which is responsible for our memory and memory formation and storage. The amygdala, which is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You've heard of flight or fight. Blah, blah, blah. See, easy for me to say. You've heard about fight or flight, like you're familiar with that. But there's also two others, which is freeze and fawn. Okay. And we don't talk about them as much. You may have heard of freeze, but we also have fawn. Okay, which is like, like, right. And then our thalamus, which is our sensory processing. That's our up, down, hot, cold, etc. Okay. So the nucleus accumbens is right here. There's this guy. Okay. And it holds the treasure chest of rewards, the dopamine, the serotonin, all of those things. Okay. And so the ventral tegmental area is actually like poised like a bat signal towards the nucleus accumbens. Okay. And then you have the prefrontal cortex. Now, a prefrontal cortex, or a PFC, is up here. Okay. And it's known as our thinking or planning part of our brain. It's where we make decisions. So let's just go through an example. Okay. I'm going to go through a couple of examples, right? Now, again, none of these things care about your morality. None of these things care. It's just all primal. Okay. It's just all signals and signaling in the brain, right? So I'm feeling really sad. Okay. I've had a terrible like childhood. I've had just an awful, like, I've had trauma. I've got all those ACEs that you probably are familiar with. And I'm feeling really down. And I use cocaine. Like, you know what? I'm here with some either friends or coworkers or people, and they have some cocaine. and I'm feeling down. So because I'm feeling down, I want to feel that sense of connection. And in this space, I may feel a little bit easily suggestible. Okay, I'm pretty vulnerable right now, so oh, oh my gosh. Right now, let's think about that. Let's pause right there. Okay. What has happened? All right. So I have now formed a memory. Okay. Okay. And I have now created sensory processing. I feel amazing. And all of this dopamine, and by the way, I'm speaking on this in segments. This all happens just like that, right? It's almost immediate. And then we'll gradually, like, it can keep going. But this all happens in a matter of milliseconds. Okay. So you get this production of dopamine, right? The cocaine allows for that to happen. It kind of induces that, right? You get this big boost of dopamine, big boost of serotonin that goes directly to the nucleus accumbens for our motivation and goal-directed behavior, that then goes to the prefrontal cortex for thinking and planning, which is also connected to our amygdala, or I'm sorry, to our hippocampus, that's forming a memory in our thalamus, and we feel great. And oh my gosh, this is the best thing. How likely do you think I'm going to want to do that again when I get sad? Because now I've made an association. When I get sad, I can use this substance and I feel better. Okay, that felt really good. I'm going to do that again. Oh, I'm going to do that again. Oh, I'm going to do that again. 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 And so now I've done that so many times to where now whenever I feel sad, it's an automated response of I'm going to go get that thing. Think of you. So for those of you who have dessert after dinner, do you have to think about it? I mean, honestly, you probably get a craving for ice cream or something sweet after dinner, right? Why? Well, it's not that there's anything requiring that you get dessert, but as you have done that behavior over time, now as your meal is ending, you're already thinking about dessert. You're already kind of craving something sweet because you've made that association. My meal is not done until I've had this thing, right? So that's a hard thing to break, right? Because sugar is so good. But you've made that association. You start kind of salivating for it, a little bit Pavlovian in that way, right? So addiction is just your brain doing the thing that you've trained it to do. You have trained it to do this thing. And so it's going to be searching for this thing that you've trained it to look for. In the same way that you've trained yourself to look for sweets after a meal, right? Or when you're bored and you have that sensation and you go to the pantry and look and hope that there's something in there that you didn't buy at the grocery that you wish that you had have bought at the grocery, and you're just kind of hoping that it appears in your pantry. You and then you find that, the chocolate or whatever that you were looking for, the salty thing that you really wanted. You've made that association to where you're burnt. Like, whenever I feel boredom, whenever I'm feeling restless, I go get this thing. You have trained yourself to do that. Okay. And then over time, your brain just kind of takes over. Right. And so that's what makes it very difficult. But all of these things are pathways that are happening in the brain that we are training ourselves, that people who struggle with addiction kind of train themselves to look for and anticipate. And that's anticipatory response, right? That's what's happened. Okay. And that's also what makes it difficult, is because to get to recovery, you got to go without that thing that gave you so much good stuff. Right. And so now you're having to relearn a whole thing, but it's not as much fun. I mean, it's fun, but it's not, it's not a heroin high or a fentanyl high or the euphoria you get when you drink. Like, those things it's not the same. Okay. Brain changes with substance use disorder. I mean, this is the lower availability of dopamine receptors mean that more of the drug is required for homeostasis. Okay. It's also why standard dopamine producing activities, sex, family, food, etc., do not have as much impact when struggling with addiction. And it's also why recovery is so challenging, because the brain has the ability to heal, but it's just not immediate. You can kind of see the difference. Okay. These are the controls and these are the addicted, right? This is dopamine, DAD2 receptors. These are dopamine receptors that are available. And the dopamines are the things that naturally help us to feel good. Okay. Addicted to heroin, look at the changes before the control. Like that's a healthy amount, right? And then the addicted person, look at how, so like the standard things, like last night when Cora had an ace. I do not identify as struggling with addiction, but when Cora had scored a point, I can't tell you how high that made me. Like, it was such a cool damn thing to see. Okay. It was such a cool dad thing to see her do that. And like, it filled me with so much pride and joy for her. And it was cool, right? I'm getting a little high right now, I think. But for somebody that's struggling with addiction, that's not going to hit the same, right? I mean, look at the changes here with alcohol, methamphetamine. I mean, methamphetamine, you're flooding with a ton of stimulants, right? So it's a very different thing. And it's not going to be something that's immediate. And when you have trained your brain into looking for immediate rewards, and then it's like, all right, where's my reward? And it's not going to know what to do. Okay. So what do we look for in a diagnosis? And we'll run through these quickly because I've gotten a little away from myself. We look for 11 things. Okay. But they're broken down into 4 different criteria: impaired control, social impairment, risky use, and pharmacological criteria. Okay. Impaired control, taking the substance in larger amounts or over a longer period than was originally intended. Having a persistent desire to cut down or regulate substance use, but reporting multiple unsuccessful efforts to do so. In other words, I've tried to quit and I can't. Spending a great deal of time obtaining, using, or recovering from the effects of substance. I'm alcohol use disorder, so I've got hangovers every single day. And I used to be able to get up at 7 and be okay. Now I'm like having to lay in bed until 9:30 because my hangovers are so bad. Cravings or urges to use is manifested by an intense desire to use the drug that may occur at any time. Okay. Social impairment, recurrent substance use resulting in failure to fulfill major obligations at work, school, or home. Okay. So you used to be able to be there for your kids, you used to be able to be there for your significant other, and now you're using so much that you can't go to work, you can't do stuff at school, you can't wash the dishes, right? Continued substance use despite social interpersonal problems caused or exacerbated by the effect of the substance. So that would be like, I used to go or I'm getting nagged at a lot, and I'm just not gonna quit. We have fights a lot about the fact that I'm using too much, and I don't think that I am, so they can go, f off and whatever. But I don't need to change. Important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of substance use. So you used to do stuff with the PTA. You used to go play in a pickleball league. You used to, volunteer at a food shelter. And now you just want to use all the time. So you used to do these things and now you don't anymore. Risky use, recurrent substance use in situations where it's physically hazardous, such as you're driving or using lawn tools while intoxicated. I've had patients that struggled with opiate use disorder that would tell me that they would work a forklift at a factory and they would be high while they were using the forklift. So, I mean, stuff like that. Continued substance use despite knowledge of having a physical or psychological problem that is likely to be caused or exacerbated by the substance. So this would be somebody who has hepatitis C but is still continuing to use. This would be somebody who has a cirrhotic liver because of alcohol use disorder, and yet they continue to drink. This is somebody that struggles with anxiety and knowing that when we tell them that actually alcohol is kind of making your anxiety worse, but they still continue to use it. Now, these last 2 are pharmacological criteria. So if somebody is under the care of a doctor using, let's say, Suboxone or using methadone or using whatever substance at the benzo, these don't count. Okay. But if they're not under the care of a doctor, then they do count. So tolerance, which is signaled by increased doses of the substance to get the desired effect, or a markedly reduced effect when the usual dose is consumed, meaning they have to take more to get the same effect. And then withdrawal symptoms occurring with abrupt reduction or cessation of the substance use. So the reason these don't count is because sometimes patients can become tolerant to a medication, but the doctor will bump them up just a little bit, but they're under the care of a doctor. Okay, so that's okay. And then withdrawal could be they decide they want to wean down and they have withdrawal symptoms, so that's why this wouldn't count. Okay, so this doesn't count if they're getting appropriate care. Okay. So there are 11 total criteria to specify the severity you need. 2 to 3 are mild, 4 to 5 are moderate, and 6+ is severe. Okay. Okay, so treatment. Right. So if our diagnosis is our framework, then the treatment plan is the way for us to get there. Okay. And here is something that can be a little controversial as I say it, initially, but let me explain. Abstinence may not be the eventual destination. In fact, when I took my test to get my licensed alcohol and drug counselor letters after my name, one of the first questions that I remember was it gave me a scenario of a guy that was his wife kind of got onto him because he was using cocaine, and he would go out with his buddies and he would use cocaine about once every 4 or 5 months with his friends, but he suffered no effects, like long-term effects. There were no health problems, and he wasn't like blowing his money on blow. He was just kind of using. What would you consider this? And the correct answer was recreational use, which is not diagnosable because there's not a problem. And when again, that goes back to how do we look at drugs? Cocaine is just a chemical. That's all it is. We're going to talk about how it's formed later, but it's just a chemical. That's all it is. And so he's using it recreationally. Now, does it come with dangers? Absolutely. But it's not diagnosable. Okay? Just because somebody's used a substance doesn't mean they got a problem with it. So abstinence may not be the eventual destination. I have patients that alcohol use disorder that casually drink. They work sales jobs and they have to wine and dine and take people out. And they were like, I drink too much, but I still want to be able to drink. And so can we moderate their use to where they can have a drink when they go out with someone? I'm not saying that it's the best idea in the world, but that's not for me to decide. I'm not in charge of their recovery. They are. Okay. So abstinence may not be the eventual destination. Controlled use can be a goal. Now it comes with risks, but it's a goal. Okay. Also, recovery is not linear, and it kind of looks like the stock market, right? I wonder what happened there in 2020. What people think sometimes is once I get in treatment, it's a straight shot to recovery, and it's not. Okay. But here's the thing. Even these low moments, right? If we draw a line, which I'm going to try to draw a line, maybe draw. Even these low moments, ooh, how pretty, right, are farther along than where we started. Okay. So if we want to say that this is treatment, let's say this person has been in treatment for almost 2 years, right? And they've had a low moment, like, cause that happens, life happens. Like but it's further along than where they started, and that's okay. Okay. It's not going to be healing is not linear. Okay. Healing is not linear. Cool. So remember, treatment should be patient-centered. A question that I would always ask my patients are, what are you willing to commit to today? Okay. What are you willing to commit to today? And then also there are going to be 5 treatment goals if we're being honest with ourselves, right? You're going to have what the patient wants. You're going to have what the family wants, and they may be different. Okay. You will have maybe what the community wants, the community that you're working in. If you're in a very progressive community, your treatment plan may look a little bit different than somebody that's in more of a conservative place. If you're in a rural part of the state or a part of your state, like those are going to look a little different because of resources and things that are around and things. So those are different treatment goals, right? If you look at Butler, I'm in Ohio. So look at Butler County. If you're not familiar with Butler County, they have a peach of a sheriff who at one time said that people who are addicted to opiates should only get 3 Narcan. After that, let them die. Whatever happens, happens. He's a peach, but that's the community. But some people in Butler County were like, hell yeah, let them die. It's terrible, but that's the community, right? And that's a different treatment goal. Okay. You're also going to have, what does the business want? Okay. And then you, right? You're going to have your own belief as a therapist. Now, ultimately, it's what the patient wants. But part of our skill is being able to work through some of those barriers through motivational interviewing, through asking questions in a certain way to kind of maybe nudge them in a certain level to a certain treatment thing, or even offer it up as an alternative to where they're at. Okay. I'm curious. Okay. You say this, I'm curious, what if we tried this? Or would you be open to doing this? Because sometimes patients may not know where they want to be, but they don't have the words to say that. And so that's going to be part of our skill. Okay. But that's what this class is for. So next week, the art of rapport building. 40% of effectiveness of treatment depends on the rapport that you build with your patient. Okay. It's not necessarily about the treatment that you use. It's not exactly about the treatment plan that you use. It's about who you are as a person and how you build rapport. Okay. Enjoy this last week of August. I will see you next week. As always, Canadian geese are definitive proof that evil exists. Live Mahalo. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.